We have Congressman Jim Himes with us. Thanks so much for being here. So you are the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee and a member of the Gang of Eight. So you're one of the few lawmakers who's been able to view some of the classified video of the double tap Caribbean boat strikes. You've seen some of the intelligence surrounding these killings by the Trump administration in international waters around Venezuela. Tell us what has been most alarming to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess, smaller picture, and then let's widen the aperture. The smaller picture is that the video, which, I hope will be made available to the American public, of the so-called double tap, that is to say the three strikes on two individuals who were just, clinging to the wreckage of a boat in the middle of the Caribbean. That was really hard to watch. And I've been doing this for a long time, so I've watched a lot of videos of strikes that we've taken against terrorists in particular. This was a very different thing. And it was a very different thing because these guys were in no position to continue hostilities, right? I mean, they were, had we left them alone, my guess is they would have slipped under the waves in a matter of hours. So, if you want to think about this in the context of a war, which this is not, because if it were a war, the Congress would have authorized it. You're talking about the possibility that it's a war crime. In any event, it's very, very hard to watch. Now, widen the aperture a little bit. And the reason I say it's not a war is because, the administration has crafted this idea that it's a war, but it's not a war. It's a war because we have, whatever it is, 20% of our American naval combat power using helicopters and airplanes and missiles and bombs and stuff. Oh, but it's not a war, because if that were a war, then there would be obligations to actually get permission from Congress to do it. So, not only is the video really hard to watch, but the whole underlying rationale here just shows utter disdain for the Congress and the Constitution, which says that we get to approve this kind of thing.
So I know other lawmakers said that the survivors were waving their hands in the air. Is that something you can confirm?
Yeah, I don't want to get too into the details, but yeah, there is a moment when it's pretty clear that they see some American platform, I don't know what it was, and they do exactly what you or I would do if we were clinging to a piece of wood in the middle of the ocean. There was a lot of, hand waving. And so, yes, but the idea that they had any ability to continue hostilities, did they have a gun? No. Did they have a radio? No. I mean, were they, for all I know, these guys had concussions and internal bleeding, right? They just had a bomb go off over their head. So that's the piece of this that is pretty hard to watch.
So from what I've been told, Hegseth is about to brief you and the rest of the Gang of Eight shortly after you get off this call with us. What do you expect to hear from him?
Well, I just don't know. And I must tell you, I'm a little worried because, since Admiral Bradley, who is the commander involved in this particular strike, was with us for several hours last week, I don't think they're doing a circle back around to continue talking about this strike. And especially since the Congress has made it very clear that we expect this video to be made available to the committees here. So I really don't know. And as you might imagine, I'm a little nervous about it. We've got a lot of combat power floating off the coast of Venezuela. God only knows what the president's guys, his real estate team are doing, Ukraine, Russia, I'm always a little jittery before these Gang of Eight meetings.
So what do you think Democrats' best hand is here? Like, what can Democrats in Congress do to put a check on what appear to be illegal actions by this administration when it comes to what's happening in Venezuela?
Yeah. Well, the Democrats by themselves, the American people decided a year ago that the Democrats would be in the minority in the House, the minority in the Senate, and shut out of the White House. And so our tools, certainly on the House side, are pretty limited. But what we do have is the ability to urge our Republican colleagues to show a little interest in being a co-equal branch of government and to manifest that. And you may chuckle when I say that, but for the fact that this week we'll vote on what's known as the National Defense Authorization Act. And in that NDAA, it's known as, in that we basically withhold money from the Secretary of Defense unless and until he makes those videos available to the Congress. We fund a lot of the NATO elements like the Baltic Initiative, commit to keeping troop levels in Europe, all stuff that if you believe the administration's rhetoric that they are not terribly happy about, but the Congress has said, we're going to do that. That kind of independence and oversight orientation is pretty rare amongst my Republican colleagues, but it's not completely absent, I'm happy to say.
That's very interesting. So what do you think the odds are that the American people will eventually see these videos? Could the administration just continue to keep them classified?
I think the odds are pretty good. As I said, we've demanded a more broad distribution here in the Congress, but also, look, they've got no defense that these things are secret, right? I mean, for the last 2 months, every single time Pete Hegseth orders one of these strikes, it's up on Twitter. Right. So they've kind of given up on the argument that if we put these videos up, we could compromise national security. Right. I mean, they've been putting this up like pornography for the last 2 months. So they don't have any principled reason to object. And, I think it's important. And I think it's important for this reason. If you were to poll Americans, I bet you about half of them would say, tens of thousands of Americans are dying from overdoses. Now, never mind that we're shooting at cocaine here, not at the fentanyl that is killing most Americans. Set that aside for a moment. There is a certain, emotional satisfaction that Americans feel when they see the United States, taking out these guys who are bad guys, right? And there's a lot of reasons to be concerned about that aren't emotional, like the fact that we generally don't execute people without a trial, that we generally try to show criminals due process, that we have a presumption of innocence in this country, all that stuff. But there is nonetheless a real emotional, visceral feeling of like, yeah, we're sticking it to those guys. When you see this video, you're going to take a deep breath and step back and say, whoa, wait a minute, is this what that means? And I think it's pretty important for the American people to see that.
So obviously, Republicans have seen this as well. Like, what have your Republican colleagues said behind the scenes? Obviously, you don't want to mention any names, but are they as outraged as some of the Democrats are?
Well, it's been pretty disturbing, right? Because we all saw the same video, and there's not a lot of dispute about what this video shows. A couple guys clinging to some wreckage, no guns, no nothing, no motor, no ability to move, no radios. And you had radically different interpretations based on party registration. I mean, that's a little weird, right? So, no surprise in this very polarized area where too many of my Republican friends feel that it's their job to defend the indefensible, specifically the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. And again, the only note of optimism I would note is that if you look in this bill that we're going to pass this week, the NDAA, you'll see that Democrats and Republicans came together to say, you will show this video more broadly. And so, that's a pretty thin reed to hang on, but it's not nothing.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. So I do want to shift topics. I know you don't have a ton of time here. The Affordable Care Act subsidies. It's a huge topic. Supposedly, we're going to get something this month in terms of a vote if Republicans stick to what they promised. Do you think that they will expire this year? Do you think Republicans are willing to do anything? Will they extend the subsidies? And if not, will we have another government shutdown in the next couple of months?
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not a natural pessimist, but, when you talk about Republicans with healthcare, it's like, drunken teenagers with dynamite, like nothing good can happen, right? And so, they're just not prepared to engage in a good faith effort. They've spent a decade and a half saying that the work we did on the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, was a disaster. And they don't have any affirmative ideas. I mean, their best idea is let's expand HSAs, these savings accounts where you can put in pre-tax money and use that to pay the doctor for your drugs. The problem is, half of Americans don't actually have an income tax liability. So that's only of value to about half Americans. And by the way, to the wealthiest half of Americans who actually have an income tax liability. So they really have no ideas. And it's sad because, the expiration of these subsidies is not going to, first and most importantly, wreak havoc with Americans all across the country, including in Connecticut, by the way, where we're getting hit very, very badly, very, very badly. That's going to be a lot of pain to go around. And the political blowback that the Republicans are going to experience when people fully grasp what this means and when people are dropping their health insurance and stuff is going to be pretty ferocious. And what we're lacking here is the ability to say, guys, let's put down our swords and the armor and let's realize that our healthcare system in this country is unsustainable, right? The average family, if you priced it all in, the average cost of healthcare for the average family is about $40,000, right? And you can have the government pay for this and your employer pay for that, but we're pretty much at a point where healthcare is becoming unaffordable for almost all Americans. So let's get at the underlying problem here, which is a spectacularly inefficient healthcare system, and make a good faith effort to reform it so that it's more efficient. And then let's talk about subsidies. Even if a more efficient system, lots of lower income people can't afford it, then let's talk about how we help them. But of course, that's not the conversation that's happening here.
I
Would you
remember
guys be
Trump
willing to shut the
he was going
government
to
down
release
again?
his healthcare
Oh, I'm
plan
sorry.
in 2 weeks. I think that was 7 years ago, right?
Oh yeah, no, we've had concepts of plans and concepts, and tomorrow or Tuesday or whatever. And of course, and again, I mean, there's just Republicans can't grapple with the healthcare industry, right? Because there's no getting around the fact that two things have to happen for that industry to be reformed. Number one, a bunch of people have to have their lunch taken away, right? I mean, the PBMs that siphon off, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of profits, some of these hospitals, some of these pharmaceutical companies that are just, I mean, again, they're sitting down to big old lunches. That lunch needs to get smaller. There's no two ways about it. And we need to do hard stuff like, consider that we're spending tens of billions of dollars a year to pay for dialysis for people who, whose underlying conditions could be addressed. Anyway, they're just not prepared to deal with that. And so, it's going to be some time before we get to dealing with the underlying problems. But man, is it urgent, right? Because when people start dropping their health insurance, they don't go to the doctor. And when they don't go to the doctor, bad things happen.
Yeah. So I know you have to get going here. I know you have that meeting with Hegseth. I hope that something comes about, and I will all be listening to see what you guys, the Gang of Eight, have to say after this meeting. Hopefully it's something positive. Hopefully we get some transparency about this.
Yeah, hopefully we get to see the video. I think we deserve to, right?
Yeah. Look, again, I just think it's really important. We're a democracy and we pay the taxes, each of us, that pay for what we're doing here. And I think it's pretty important that Americans see what it is that we're doing here.
Thanks again, Congressman Himes.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Take care.